Along the way, we're going to try together to come up with interesting comparisons that we could make with the Bloody Chamber stories. So the trick to getting an A or an A star in this particular question is to know your text really well and be making interesting comparisons and contrasts. And you can only do that if you've got a really good sort of collection of quotes that you can kind of small details that you can then make more interesting and unique comparisons. So does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Elif, you got your microphone on? Some of you have got it switched off. Okay.
Mine's on now.
Brilliant. Okay, good. So I might be asking you for different things. Okay, so I'm going, by the end of this lesson, hopefully you've got some interesting quotes from Mina's attack onwards to the end of the novel. I'm focusing particularly on Mina, and I'm also looking a little bit at Van Helsing, who I think is also an interesting character at this stage of the book. Okay, right. I hope you're all well, by the way. Is everyone okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. Take a few moments to read through these quotes, and I'll talk about why they're significant to me. Okay, right. So let's consider the character of Mina. I think the successful students in the past have looked at Mina and seen that she's more than just one thing. She's a more complex and, as a result, more interesting character for readers to grapple with. And that maybe different readers over different times see different things in Mina. Ananya, can I ask you, you've still got your microphone off, Ananya, by the way. Mm-hmm. Excellent. I enjoyed your short story, by the way, Ananya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
It was really good. What from these quotes, what do you get from the character of Mina? What conclusions could you make from taking one or two of these quotes?
I can say that there's the idea of transformation in Mina.
Yeah. In what way does she transform?
So firstly, before she was very idealistic as a Victorian woman, but later on, even Van Helsing said that she has a brain of a man, which shows that she became more and more independent.
Yes, that's interesting. So the idea of transformations is something that you could grapple with. If you're looking at the Bloody Chamber stories and you're looking at how people turn, either from animal to human or vice versa, you can neatly compare that perhaps with the transformation within Mina herself. In many ways, I'll talk about this. Hopefully you've got some notes in front of you. You might take some notes during this lesson, and you might also have your books to hand as well. In many ways, Mina undergoes two kinds of transformation. On the one level, physically, Mina is turning into a vampire slowly during this part of the book. So she either her skin either looks very red and blood-filled, or she looks very pale, and her teeth start to grow as her gums recede. So she's transforming that way. But Mina also transforms within herself. Roisin, can you add to that idea of how, in her personality or character, does Mina transform? Are you there?
Yeah.
Shall I give you a bit of time to think about it?
Yeah, sorry.
And I'll come back to you. Would anyone else like to make a comment at this stage? How about you, Fergal? Your microphone's off, by the way.
Yeah, what was your question again, sir?
In what ways could we say that Mina, towards the end of the book, has transformed from our initial impressions of her?
I don't know, like Ananya said, she's obviously become a lot more independent and less concerned with being the ideal woman, I guess. Like,
What do you think she thinks of the new woman? Maybe from the second quote there, Fergal. She says, the new woman won't condescend in future to accept. She will do the proposing herself, and a nice job she will make of it too. What do you think she thinks about the new woman?
she thinks it's a good thing, but maybe she doesn't see herself as like a new woman. She's like, she's looking into the future for future generations, I think. Like,
yeah, that's interesting. Yes. Yeah. That this idea of the new woman appeals to her and she thinks it's a good thing, but perhaps maybe she doesn't see herself as one. What might be the reason for that, Chisholm, do you think? Chisholm, your microphone's off, by the way.
What was the question again, sir?
Yeah, why? Let's take Fergal's point that maybe she doesn't consider herself to be a new woman. Why do you think that might be?
Is it to do with the fact that she's a middle class woman with like a reputation, and she can't afford to sort of screw up her reputation by having the characteristics of a new woman, like being financially independent? Well, she is financially independent, but being like what's the word, like sexually liberated and stuff like that. She can't afford that for her reputation.
Yeah, that's a nice, interesting point, and it's worth maybe taking a few notes on that. So let's consider where we've gone so far. That she sees the new woman as an ideal, as a positive thing, and it's something for the future. Fergal says that doesn't necessarily mean she sees herself as a new woman. Chisholm takes that further by saying maybe it's her own social conditioning as a middle-class woman, with the emphasis, the Victorian emphasis on reputation, means that she's kind of constrained. She's socially conditioned that she can't necessarily be that new woman. That's really interesting, and examiners like seeing that nuanced approach. As she says in the fourth quote, you can't teach etiquette and decorum, but the pedantry of it biting into yourself a bit. What's interesting about that is she's acknowledging that, you know, she's a bit stiff because she's taught other people, she's taught kids how to have etiquette and decorum, and she's affected by that herself. She's a bit of a pedant, someone who is a stickler to detail. So she says perhaps, you know, she's become that kind of woman because she's taught that kind of behavior. That quote, I think, you know, the pedantry of it biting into yourself a bit. Try to be aware that there's kind of deliberate humor in Dracula as well. There's often overt references to biting into things. And I think there's a kind of humor at play with Stoker here, obviously reminding us of what vampires do. Okay, Megan. Hi, Megan. Can I ask you about this quote that I'm going to read out? Why I think it might be an interesting quote. What does it reveal, do you think? I suppose it is the taste of the original apple that remains still in our mouths. Now that's from about chapter 17. What do you think that means? Your microphone's off, Megan. Good.
Now.
Yeah, you're fine now.
Okay. I feel like it's like the original apple, like from the Bible.
Right, the allusion to the Eden story, excellent.
Yeah, like it's the how so like how when she ate it, she was like banned from the garden. So
Yeah.
like maybe it's like, and it says how it's still in our mouth. So like, kind of like a sign to like stop. Don't try and like transform. Like it was sinful to transform.
What sin do you think she's referring to there? Can you remember? The sin of what?
Is it about the new woman?
No. That's a good guess. What she's referring to there is the sin of pride. At this stage in the book, Van Helsing says that women have a weakness. They tend not to have details. And he's surprised that she can hold on to details. There's a lot of patriarchal chauvinism in this book. And she reminds the group that she's recorded all of the information and she's got the details to hand. And it's perhaps there is her own sense of self-pride. She's living in a society which doesn't really recognize the intellectual strengths of women. And is the taste of the apple is her own pride in demonstrating that women are stronger than men assume, particularly Van Helsing, who hasn't got a very great opinion of women. Okay, could I ask someone else this time? Hi, Camilla, hope you're well. I'd like to look at the last quote here. I'll read it out for those who can't make it, they can video it. Now God be thanked that all has not been in vain. See, the snow is not more stainless than her forehead. The curse has passed away. Who do you think says that, Camilla?
I'm not sure, but maybe it's one of the men, as they refer to her forehead, which was Mina's forehead, when the wafer got imprinted on it.
Yeah,
but I'm
you
not
would be right. Who is it? Who is it actually says it? Do you think? Can anyone step in and tell us?
Maybe Van Helsing.
It's a guess, but it's not the correct one. Can anyone else tell us?
Was it Quincy?
I'm asking for an answer rather than a question. Quincey, and his surname is?
Morris.
Morris, yeah. What happens after he says that quote?
He dies.
He dies. What's the significance of that quote? You're correct, by the way. It's Quincey Morris. Why might that quote be a useful quote to have in your pocket come exam day? Elif?
Because it shows how they managed to get rid of the evil from Dracula, and like how his sacrifice of dying was worth it because it meant that Mina was saved.
Yes, that's a nice point. Ben, your microphone is off. How might you compare this with one of the Bloody Chamber stories? Ben, you with us? Turn your microphone on.
Yeah.
Excellent. How would you take that quote and compare it with the Bloody Chamber, Ben?
The quote.
Yeah.
Is it possible for it to be repeated?
Oh, can you not see it?
No. Oh, the one at the bottom.
Yeah. Now God be thanked. In vain.
Is it
no more stainless than snow? Curse is past.
You can relate it to the snow child, where the child is basically like melt into the snow, and the kind of like, I think the color left behind is representative of like the loss of innocence and that encountering of evil, and you could relate that to the flame on her forehead.
Yes. So in the snow child, you're seeing that as a loss of innocence. What could you say about innocence here?
Yeah.
What could you say about innocence here in Dracula?
You could say that Mina's innocence was kind of taken away by her encounter with Dracula.
Yes, but what does this quote seem to suggest about that innocence?
That it's gone from Mina.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. In what other ways could we see that last quote there, Ananya?
The last quote.
Yeah,
Or
Ben
is-
sees this quote suggesting that her innocence is gone, but Quincy's saying, see, the snow is no more stainless than her forehead. The curse has passed away. If you compare that, can you compare that in other ways?
So which quote is that? I can't find it here.
Sorry. You all should have a PowerPoint instead of seeing me. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's the final quote down the bottom. God be thanked that all has not been in vain. The snow is not more stainless than her forehead. The curse has passed away.
I think it's more of a restoration of innocence.
Right? Why?
Because he says that the curse has passed away and that the snow is not more stainless than her forehead, which means that she's as pure as the snow, which is kind of contrasting to the snow child.
Yes, I see. Now, we've also got this mark, again, an allusion to the mark of Cain, the idea of an external sin being on somebody. Mina's sin disappears, but the girl in the bloody chamber, her sin stays there. She can never get rid of it. What is the point of that Carter's trying to make there? Would anyone? I'm opening this up to anyone. Why do you think Carter's protagonist has a stain that never goes away, but Mina's stain does go away? Can anyone explain that contrast? Elif, how about you?
I think that because Soka was a Christian, it's like the Christian path to like forgiveness. When you sin and then like you're forgiven, you have to like pay for your mistakes and then you're forgiven.
Yeah.
So like the fact that Mina paid for what she had done, and then her mark goes away, shows like that Soka holds those Christian values. But I think Carter wants to make more of like a statement, and to show like that things are more permanent in life.
What, for women? Is she making the point about women in some way in society?
Yeah.
That they're not given the opportunity? What's more permanent, do you think?
Just the fact that they the way they suffer from the hands of men in a patriarchal society, and they don't get to have the freedom to live the life they want to live. And then I think the mark is like a reminder of that.
That's interesting. With comparisons and contrasts, examiners like you to tease out, what the author's intentions are. So that's quite interesting there. So we could perhaps say that this Mina stain goes away because this is a much more traditional Victorian Christian novel with a Christian ending, and for a Christian readership, her sin, whether it's her sin or not, is washed away. We have a resolution at the end. Victorian novels often like to resolve things. They like to see the world being fixed again. Whereas Carter's showing us an unresolved ending. This girl still has this mark on her forehead, and Elif's point is perhaps that women in a patriarchal society, Carter might be suggesting, are always going to be reminded of their sin. They're never going to lose that. That's a kind of interesting contrast. Okay, let's move on to the next page. Tell me if you can't see it. This is still on Mina. I'll talk through some of these this time, and I might ask you to add to things as well. We women have something of the mother in us that makes us rise above smaller matters when the mother spirit is invoked. In what way does Mina become a mother to the people around her? Olivia, are you able to answer that? Hello, Olivia. I hope you're well.
Hello. Yeah. How she's a mother.
Yeah.
Well, Mina is able to comfort a lot of the male characters, and in that way, the male characters are then able to express their emotions, which was in Victorian times not seen as a manly thing to do. So, for example, with Arthur, when Arthur breaks down and Mina comforts him, so that he doesn't go through his whole grief over Lucy on his own. And also, she's very concerned about Renfield, despite the fact that Renfield is stigmatized as someone who's mentally disarray. So
Yeah.
she becomes a lot like a mother of the mentors, which in a sense could be seen as her having some sort of dominance over their emotional well-being.
Yes, that's an interesting point. Mina has the effect of calming the madness of Renfield, doesn't she? When he sees her, he calms down, and
Yeah.
she has that ability to calm people like a mother. She also does it to Jonathan. She becomes like a mother to Jonathan, doesn't she? And the other men are able to break down and cry on her shoulder. It's interesting that she becomes more of a mother figure as Lucy becomes, earlier in the book, becomes like the anti-maternal figure, doesn't she, with the baby that she throws aside. So Mina conforms to the ideal of what a Victorian woman should be, maternal and comforting. What could we say about mothers in the Bloody Chamber collection? Can anyone make any kind of comparison or contrast with another mother figure? Virgil, microphone on, please. Could you name 3 mothers in the Bloody Chamber collection, actually, just out of interest?
Yeah, the mother of the Snow Child, the Queen, I think.
I suppose she is her mother, isn't she? Because
Yeah.
she's created by the... Yeah, that's interesting. What other mothers are there?
The mother in the Bloody Chamber, where she goes and saves her daughter from the Marquis.
Yes. And a third one? Are you able to give us a third one?
I can't think of one.
Can anyone step in and think of a third one? Thanks, Virgil. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would it be the mother in the werewolf?
Yes.
The little girl's mother who tells her to take her father's knife.
That's right. Yes.
To be careful.
Yes. So if we were to get a question in the exam about mothers, interesting, fairy stories often have an absence of mothers.
The mother, yeah.
Yeah, don't they? Maternal mothers. There's stepmothers sometimes, isn't there? And there's fathers and daughters. What comparisons could we say about the presentation of mothers? Ananya?
They're usually used as a way of like a warrior, especially in the Bloody Chamber. A lot of the times it's the mother saving the daughter. So in the werewolf, she was the one to give her the means of protection, and then in the Bloody Chamber, the mother came to rescue her. So it's as if Carter is subverting the idealistic mother from the Victorian times into a new form who's more independent.
Excellent. Okay, Thank you. So on this slide, we see Mina being a mother. We see her refer to the new woman. We see her having anxiety for Lucy, not only for her health, but for her reputation. This emphasis on reputation is such a Victorian ideal. She fits the ideal of the mother figure. She's also religious. We are truly in the hands of God, he alone. And I pray him with all the strength of my sad and humble soul that he will watch over my beloved husband. So Mina is a God-fearing Christian. Why do you think Stoker, Roisin, has Mina as explicitly Christian, do you think?
I guess it's kind of a contrast to Jonathan, who doesn't really believe in religion until he journeys to Dracula's castle, and then you get this contrast with Mina, who's very religious and I guess has that idea of being virtuous and being saved by God.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's another transformation. The transformation from perhaps atheism to faith is something that Jonathan undergoes. So sometimes if you get a question about that, think about what are the ways in which characters change. That's an interesting one. Mina, of course, is always a very God-fearing Christian. I'll move on to her a bit further. Okay, let's move on to the next slide now, the fourth of 7 slides. Let's look at Van Helsing a little bit. Anybody tell me, and I had to reread the section myself last night in preparation for this lesson. Can anyone tell me about Van Helsing's family background? A, is he married or not? B, does he have a family? C, what's the situation with his family? Can anyone tell me? Let's take the third quote. I've not put a bullet point on this. Can everyone see it? This slide with Van Helsing. Even I, who am faithful husband to this now no wife, am bigamist. Is Van Helsing married?
Oh,
Is his wife dead?
No,
no,
she's
he
not
was
dead.
never married.
He was married.
He was.
Yeah. What he reveals to us, Van Helsing, is that he's married and his wife is, she's lost her wits. So she's insane. She's mad. And so he's married in the eyes of God and law, but she is now no wife in the sense of a normal wife. So this is another example, contextually, literary context, of this obsession with insane women in Victorian novels. Has anyone read Jane Eyre and can tell me about insanity in women in Jane Eyre? Has anyone read Jane Eyre? Okay. In Jane Eyre, Mr. Rochester has there's a love story with him and Jane Eyre, who's a guardian. She's come to work for him, but he's previously married, and his wife is insane, and she lives up in the loft. She's the mad woman in the attic that we often get in Victorian fiction. Insanity is associated with female weakness. It's seen in Victorian times as a malady that really is associated with women. Hysteria comes from the word hyster, which is womb. So yeah, he's married. He had a child as well who died. And his child, if he had lived, would be around the age of Harker, I think. That's just out of interest, I'll give you that. My heart bled for that boy so of the age of mine own, had I been blessed that he had lived. Camilla, can I ask you about what this quote might be how might you compare this with the Bloody Chamber? This first quote: "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble." What does this tell us, first of all, about Van Helsing?
To tell us that he's quite patriarchal, and he thinks that men are like more stronger than women physically as well.
Yes, yes. Which is, I suppose, that Victorian mindset, I suppose, isn't it? How could you take that, perhaps, to something you've read in the Bloody Chamber collection? Could you find a similarity that proved that point?
I'm not sure. I can't think of anything on the spot, but maybe.
And I appreciate I'm putting people on the spot a little bit. Shall I?
A contrast, maybe.
Yes. Okay. What would it be?
I think in the court of the Mr. Lion, the girl's father, he doesn't exactly have. When he's in trouble, he puts his daughter out in trouble as well. So it's kind of opposite to what Van Helsing is saying.
So men are not always the best protectors of women.
Yeah.
When a woman is in trouble. Yeah, that's a valid point, and it's well done for bringing in a contrast. People are, I think, always kind of struggle in exams looking for similarities, but you could look for the direct opposite. A comparison you could make that might say that's true, just to give you to contradict you, Camilla, which is what your essay will hopefully do, give lots of contradictory views. The man in the Lady in the House of Love does offer his blood to the vampire, doesn't he? Yeah. Or does he? Does he? Does he lick? Who licks whose finger? He licks her finger, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But he licks her finger, and she wants his blood, but she doesn't have it. Maybe in not taking his blood, she becomes a woman again, doesn't she? This is interesting. Okay, let's move on. You have a good memory for facts, women. Van Helsing never said that, did he? It's not always so with young ladies. So the patriarchy continues. Do not think. Now, why might this be a central quote here? And can you see my mouse moving, by the way?
No.
Okay. I'm looking at the quote in the middle of the page. Do you not think there are things which you cannot understand and yet which are? It is the fault of our science that it wants to explain all. Roisin, why might you keep that quote in your folder? Why might it be useful?
I guess it's showing maybe the power of science, which kind of makes his point, which I guess he's trying to say about those legends of vampires, I guess, which, I don't know, maybe science overpowers these legends because it doesn't seem logical.
And what do we know about the Victorian society in science as well? What kind of context could we bring in here?
Science was on the rise. It was just beginning to there was Charles Darwin, who was just beginning to write books about evolution. So I guess he was trying to show maybe the conflicting ideas between the traditional ideas and now this new idea of science. Yes,
that's a nice idea. So Darwin is almost creating the death of religion, isn't he? He's saying, look, we haven't come from 7 days and God created everything. This is a natural form of evolution over millions of years. And science perhaps creates a crisis of faith. But what Van Helsing is saying here is that, hold on, this Victorian society full of technology and science, it can't explain everything. There are things that we don't understand. How is this quote typical of Gothic? What does Gothic deal with?
So
Yeah.
The Gothic tends to deal with like natural and things that we can't physically apprehend, like
Yes.
mentally apprehend. So
Yeah.
such as like how there's a divide between horror and then terror, where
Yes.
we experience things, but we can't physically see what has caused such anxiety within us.
That's a very good point. And so Gothic requires a leap of the imagination. It's the unknown. It's the supernatural and the uncanny. It's a world in which things are not rational. And so Van Helsing is saying to them, I want you to believe in things that you cannot. This could be religion. It could be vampires. It's requiring the reader to make a leap of faith as well, because they're reading Gothic texts. It could be religion. She is God's true dead, the next quote down, whose soul is with him. Again, we have explicitly religious Christian endings to people's lives. She is God's true dead. Her soul is with him. This idea that Lucy is saved, she goes to heaven. And look at how vampires are described by Van Helsing at the bottom. Describing vampires, a blot on the face of God's sunshine, an arrow in the side of him, capital H, who dies for man. So again, vampires are explicitly seen by Van Helsing as the Antichrist, a blot on the face of God's sunshine. They are the other. And so when you take notes on this book, be careful to look at how Dracula actually embodies an Antichrist persona. He makes Mina taste his blood, which is a sacrament in the Christian church. He says to her, you are blood of my blood, flesh of my flesh, which is the echo of the Christian Bible that is said in that. So he kind of mimics, parodies, and subverts the very Christian practices that makes him so much more terrifying. And as a result, that's where his weakness is, because he believes in it as well. But it is no place for a woman. Simi, you're not there, I don't think, are you? There's certain people who haven't been able to make it. Megan, why does Van Helsing say that last quote, but it is no place for a woman?
I think it's again reinforcing his patriarchal ideas. Like he feels the need that women should be protected and that they should be like forbidden from certain places.
Yes.
Because they can't handle it.
That's a really nice point. And are they protected by the men? Is Mina protected by the men?
Not really.
No. In hiding her away, keeping her away, they actually inadvertently lead to Dracula getting into her bedchamber. Again, the worst possible place for reputation. Another man in a woman's bedchamber is horrifying in itself, never mind the act that's taking place in there. And so maybe you could look at how the men treat the women in this novel compared to how the women protect each other or protect themselves in the Bloody Chamber stories. The werewolf girl, she goes out with a knife, ready to protect herself. The girl in the company of wolves, when the wolf threatens to attack her, she laughs and she says, what? She laughs and she says, what? In the face of the danger of the werewolf.
Did she
say, I'm not anyone's meat or something?
Yeah, very good, very good. So we can always look at how women are presented in one book, seen as weak and need protecting, and how in the other book they're shown in a completely different light, because Carter is trying to educate women or men reading it as well, that the way they've been socialized in fairy stories particularly is not a realistic way. for society. Okay, let's move on to the 5th of 7 slides now. Okay, I'm going to talk through these because I'm aware of time. Why do I think, now I know you've done a lot of work, and I really encourage you to look at the Google Doc that you all wrote together and compare it with my other classes' Google Doc. They did the same activity. And when you get a chance, print them off, keep them in your file, because you've got a load of quotes already. And also the piece of writing that you did on different interpretations of Mina's attack. I've just taken a collection of quotes from that particular section when Dracula comes into a room. The reader is forced to interpret Mina's dream, and the dream shows us, without telling us, it's showing rather than telling, it shows us that Dracula has come to her room many times before. And the uncanny, the obscurity of not knowing and not being told is typically Gothic. So Stoker shows the reader that Mina's been attacked previously, but we have to interpret that through dreams. So in a way, we become like Dr. Seward. We interpret Mina's dreams through her own journal. What's interesting about Mina is that she sees this attack in a moral, religious way. She says she is unclean. So she feels her soul has been tainted. It's not just a physical stain, it's a moral Christian stain. So that word unclean is has a lot of power to a Victorian audience. It's unclean in a spiritual sense of having sin. And so that's really important. What's really important is that not only the act has got some sexual connotations, but, you know, Dracula has made his way into the most private of place of a Victorian woman, a married woman's bedchambers. And she's in her bed dress. Again, you know, some Victorian women wouldn't have even shown their husbands their bed dress, you know. So this is, you know, lacking all propriety and decorum, and it would be shocking in itself. And what is shocking is that I'm sure all of you have got this quote: "I did not want to hinder him." She didn't want to stop him when he sunk his teeth into her neck. So again, she's kind of complicit. She's willingly putting up with this at the time. So Dracula has this kind of sexual power over women, possibly also over men as well, that is terrifying beyond just his vampirism. So Dracula says, "And you, flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood," echoes the Christian scriptures around communion. So God pity me. Again, it's all of this is seen in a Christian sense. And we are in the hands of God, unclean, polluted flesh. Your girls who you all love are mine already. So again, Dracula and all his foreign sexual powers horrify the Victorian readership because it shows their greatest anxieties and perhaps their insecurities about Europeans. Has anyone got anything else they could add to that particular slide?
Sir, could you repeat the last quote, please?
Yeah, this is where Dracula makes his escape from the gang, the Circle of Light, and he says, "Your girls who you all love are mine already." Yeah.
You know how Mina sees this as a dream? Doesn't what happened to Jonathan when he was in the Count's castle, where he saw the 3 female vampires?
Yes.
He couldn't hinder them as well. So
Yes.
in a way, the fact that both of them within the same relationship went through the same kind of experience.
Yeah, that's a really nice point. Yeah, that is significant, I think. It shows that, you know, the vampires have equal power over men and women in the same way. In what way way could we make a connection here, similarity with this idea of being complicit in your own sin, of willingly enter into an act? Can we make any comparison with the Bloody Chamber stories?
Could it be with the Tiger's Bride, for example, when she finally, after seeing the tiger naked himself, she then starts to take off her clothes.
Yeah.
But then he finds it so foreign and benign to her that she feels like she's ripping off her own underpelt. And then there's a bit where Carter references to how us humans haven't taken off our clothes since that first time that we first covered our flesh with pine leaves, I think. And
yeah.
So the idea of her shedding her clothes and shedding her place within civilization in order to be with the tiger could be seen as her accepting that first original sin that led to a man having to conceal his flesh.
That's interesting. So are you arguing that Carter's intentions are perhaps to allow people to be more sexually liberated and to not feel such guilt for such natural acts, I suppose?
Yeah, but I think it could also be that you could say that this brings in her secondary feminism, because all the other male characters in the tiger's home, they are all able to the tiger. He takes off his mask and his costume. His servant, he takes off his clothes as well, and we see that he's an ape. So the fact that the female found it more difficult and more painful to shed her own civilized mask of society could show how females are so conditioned by society in a certain way that even for us who are independent to try and show our liberation, we still have this sense of fear, despite already feeling at peace with ourselves. If that makes sense?
That makes entire sense. Thank you for that. If I was to add to that, Olivia, as well, is if we think of the female protagonist in the Bloody Chamber, she's surprised to that she's getting pleasure also from the sexual act with her husband. So there's again that kind of unleashing of sexuality that perhaps Carter is saying shouldn't be branded. It should be seen as a natural thing. After all, she makes the essay, The Sadian Women. She talks about the celebration in some ways of pornography, doesn't she? She's not a typical feminist in that sense. She says that, you know, she writes a defense of pornography in some ways in The Sadian Women. And so maybe she's arguing for a more sexually liberated approach, particularly from women. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you. Let's move on to finally this idea of transformations. We talked about this briefly. Has everyone got this slide? It's the penultimate, second last slide now. It's headed transformations. We've talked a little bit about how Mina does transform towards during the book. In some ways, Dracula unleashes sexual desire that she doesn't want to hinder. She becomes more of a mother figure for the men. But she also transforms in some ways into heroic stature. She says to them, "You must promise me, one and all, that should the time come, you will kill me." So she's unwilling to transform into a vampire, even though she is gradually physically transforming into one. She's transforming also into a martyr. She's willing to die rather than become a vampire. So she does change. Also, Lucy doesn't. Remember, Lucy kind of willingly enters into vampirism in some ways. Occasionally she comes out of it and is frightened. But Mina is defiant that she wants to be killed. Interestingly, inside the Holy Circle, where's the Holy Circle, Chisholm, in the book? Do you know where the Holy Circle is?
No.
Ananya, can you tell me what am I talking about when I'm talking about the Holy Circle? I've got 3 minutes left, so I've got to be quick.
Wasn't the Holy Circle which Van Helsing put on was it the wafers to protect Mina? And
Yeah.
not...
And to keep the 3 female vampires out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So he uses the holy bread, the sacrament of the symbol of Jesus. In the Christian church, he puts a circle around, say, keeps Mina within it, and that keeps the female vampires from outside of it. The female vampires tempt him sexually as well. Don't forget that Van Helsing reacts to the female vampires exactly as Jonathan does earlier in the book. There's a kind of patterning where, which was brought up earlier, about how Mina and Jonathan are behaving in similar ways. But why is this quote significant? Inside the Holy Circle, it is for you that I fear, says Van Helsing, where she laughed no, she says, it is for you that I fear, where she laughed the laugh low and unreal. What's significant about the language there? Fergal.
I'm not sure, like, what do you mean?
Why is her laugh described as low and unreal?
Maybe because I'm not sure.
Okay.
Wait.
Megan, why is that your microphone's off, Megan? Why is her laugh described as low and unreal?
Maybe because she's like scared, like she's trying to hide the fact that she's scared.
No.
I don't really know.
Yeah, that's okay. It's in isolation, I grant you. She's not scared. She actually says that after this quote. She goes, I have no reason to be scared. Why is her laugh low and unreal? And again, I suppose it's a reminder of things that happened previously in the book. Camilla?
I'm not exactly sure either. Maybe it's like Dracula that's made her this way now that maybe she's changing, so that's why her laugh is like that.
Yeah, precisely. Remember when we had the 3 vampires earlier in the book, they have a brittle, metallic laugh. Again, so what we realize with the transformation into vampire is that voices change, and she's becoming a vampire. And this is at this point that Van Helsing fears her. He's scared of Mina and what Mina can become. There's a moment where he'd get scared of her. So this is just before her transformation. Mina, it should be said, this next quote is significant. I'll explain why. But God be thanked that soul wail of Madam Mina had not died out in my ear. Van Helsing is about to kill one of the female vampires, the really pretty one. And he's taken by her beauty, and he can't really do it. He's, as the last quote says, he begins to be enthralled. The idea of being enthralled by the beauty of someone. He nearly can't kill the female vampire because he's attracted to her. And it's only the wail of the cry of Madam Mina that makes him do it. So Mina, in some ways, is the savior of the book. She's certainly the savior of Van Helsing, because if she didn't cry, he might not have had the strength to kill the vampires, and so would have been killed himself. So you could argue that Mina saves everybody at the end of the book. And of course, she has a man's brain. You've seen that quote before. The last quote, I dare not pause to look on her, the female vampire, lest once more I should begin to be enthralled. So just like Jonathan, Van Helsing is attracted visually. This male gaze is kind of referenced all the time. But with the female vampires, it weakens men. Whereas the male gaze in the bloody chamber perhaps is a sign of their strength. So you're thinking perhaps of opposites and similarities. I'm going to talk about the very end of the book now, and I appreciate I'm going to run over slightly, so I'll be quick. The end of the book is told through Mina's journal, right? So we get Mina's perspective on it. And this is what she says about Dracula. As I looked, the eyes saw the sinking sun, and the look of hate in them turned to triumph. Why is Dracula thinking about triumph, Ananya?
Maybe. So Dracula is looking at triumph. What?
Yeah. Can you see the quote?
Yeah.
Why does Dracula think he's going to win?
I'm not sure.
What would make Dracula win, Elif?
Oh, the sinking sun.
Yeah, it's going to turn into night.
Yeah.
The body crumpled into dust. Why might I have a problem with that quote? Can anyone tell me?
Could it be like a Christian reference to how the Bible says that men are made dust of the earth?
Yeah, from dust to dust.
So by his body turning back into dust, it's like he's gone back to his natural self.
Yeah, very good. From dust we came.
Because if you see the
yeah, from dust we came, to dust we return, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. So you see this as an explicit reference to his spiritual death.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. In what way do these, and I think it's just me here, but in what way do you think Stoker is setting up the book for a sequel? Maybe, perhaps with this quote even. And this is open to anyone. Cheers, and Megan, your microphones are off.
Oh, could it be the idea that there could be a possibility that Dracula didn't really die?
Why do you think that?
Because, for example, the reason why is because when they had killed Lucy, she didn't turn to dust. She went back to being a human body, a human corpse. But with Dracula, he turned to dust. So it could be like kind of that maybe Dracula didn't actually die. Maybe this was a body double, or like it wasn't actually the body of Dracula that they killed. They just killed a body that he was able to inhabit for a while.
Yeah, that's interesting. That there's some sense of there could be a hint at a sequel here. Now, Mina says when she looks at Dracula, there was in the face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined rested there. So Mina, because she's such a good person, she sees goodness in other people. Now, the reader may have a different view of Dracula than she does. So we always have to remember that we're seeing the action through the prism of a character. It's Mina's journal. So she imagines that he has a look of peace. And again, connotations of he's going to heaven, salvation, perhaps suggesting that. But equally, Gothic fiction creates a gap between what we are told and what we understand. And so sometimes be aware of that at the end of the book. Now, we talked about the second last quote, God be thanked. Her stain is removed. The Christian sense of forgiveness and repentance. She's going to heaven. It's all fine. And the book ends with her having a child with Jonathan. What do they call the child, Fergal?
Is it Quincy?
Yeah, it is Quincy. If you were writing a sequel, would the child have any part of this, do you think?
Yeah.
And why? And in what way?
Well, because it's named after one of the important characters in the original story.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe if Dracula comes back, he could have something to do with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The book ends on a nice conclusion, doesn't it? The family, they where do they go for their holiday, Chisholm?
I don't know.
Does anyone know? It's the last page of the book.
They go to Transylvania.
Yeah. Don't you find that surprising? That would be the last place I would go with my wife if she had her blood sucked by a vampire. But they go to visit Dracula's castle. Can you imagine? And the grave of Quincy. But to a Victorian readership, they're getting a sense of conclusion. This is resolution. The order of the world is restored, and they have a baby. She is returned to her role as mother. Family, a Christian family, win in the end. But I always feel, yeah, that's always interesting. Of course, Harry Potter ends the same way, doesn't it? You know, this kind of family reunion, and that, you know, the generation passes on. But I do wonder whether Stoker did think of writing a sequel, and I think there's evidence that he did try to write a sequel at some stage, but gave up.
Wasn't
And
it
I wonder,
Dracula's Guest or something?
yeah. I wondered whether there might have been another avenue with the idea that, you know, blood of my blood is not the blood of Dracula in Mina, and also thereby extension in in the sun. Yes, yeah.
So sad.
On that revelation, I leave that here. Thanks very much for your time today. I really much enjoyed talking to you. If you need to use this, I'm going to send out a link to this. I've recorded this. I hope you're okay with that for the other people who can't perhaps access Wi-Fi at the moment. Are you okay with me sharing it with the rest of the class?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care of yourselves. I'll be in touch next week. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
He's gone. Okay, sorry.